Thank you all once again for joining us for our weekly interlude with Seattle Chamber Music Society. This is our last one before the start of our summer festival, which is always very exciting. We're very pleased to be joined by young violinist Simone Porter, soloist, recitalist, and most importantly to us, a great chamber musician. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes to chat with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so first of all, we always like to ask and check you're staying healthy, you're doing well during this crazy time.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I hope the same to you and everyone who's watching.
Yes, yeah, we've been, knock on wood, very lucky so far. So that's great to hear. And your home is in LA, but you also grew up here in Seattle. So are you down in LA or are you back up here now?
Yeah, I'm in LA right now, so current home, but I cannot wait to return to Seattle just in I guess less than 2 weeks now.
Yeah,
My parents still live there. I still consider it my formative and like soulful home in many ways. So I'm so excited that I get to return to the festival, which I love, in a place that I adore.
excellent. Well, we're glad to have you back here very soon. Uh, you know, looking at your blog, you had talked about the fact that you kind of consciously chose, I guess, not to do recordings and to, share performances where, so many musicians have been doing those kinds of projects. Why did you choose, to kind of, I guess, in a way, go quiet, if you will, during this period?
I think I've always had a interesting relationship with sharing clips online, and that I honestly have not done it nearly as much as many or most of my colleagues. And I'd be lying if I said part of that didn't come from timidity or perfectionism, and just that like I can record an entire concerto and decide that absolutely none of the 30 seconds are worthwhile. But I think in this moment, in this quarantine, I wasn't really able to excavate a way that felt authentic or useful. And I really appreciated and tuned into and really loved the generosity of so many of my colleagues who were sharing their music, who were cultivating these online spaces. But I didn't personally, honestly feel like I had that much I didn't really feel like I had something to add that would be helpful to anybody else or to myself. I think I'm always wary a little bit of what it means to perform on the internet. I'm always a little nervous about embracing something that's a representation of itself rather than the actual thing. And in this particular case, I didn't really feel compelled um, to lean into that. Honestly, I took a humongous break. Sort of did things that took a breather and basically spread into the freedom from immediate pressure, which I don't know if I've ever really had before, and tried to really just show up by being present for my friends, for the family, for close people in my life, for sort of understanding what care meant in a more like stationary way than I usually ever am in real life. So I was doing that for the first bit, and then when all of the protests began happening, I threw myself into that and was really out there trying to show up for that, physically, financially, whatever, in whatever way I could, which took me completely away. And now I'm trying to figure out what the next step is, just as this is the first time I will be doing a performance or any type of musical collaboration since March, and I'm really beyond excited for that. A little nervous because I feel kind of rusty, but I'm really excited to make music with people again.
I'm curious. So you talked about taking a longer break before, and then getting into the Black Lives Matter marches and protests. Have you, found a schedule throughout all of that, or have you really just set the instrument down and,
Um,
really stepped away for a bit?
for a lot of it was absolutely setting the instrument down. Now it's bizarre because I have a schedule that's dictated by desire and like the pleasure principle, basically. I mean, now that I have, of course, SCMS coming up, there is, something solid to prepare for. But before that, it was playing when I wanted, what I wanted. And I think that was honestly a really generative thing, just because so much of my relationship with my instrument, which I adore, is still dictated by what's necessary professionally, and the sort of source of it all, which is this really great love that I've had since childhood, hasn't gotten to really shape what my actual days and time with the instrument looks like. So just experimenting that, being like, what is practice when it's about what I want and what I love and what I want to experiment with, what I want to listen to. That was new, and I think it absolutely sort of resuscitated or reanimated parts of my relationship with my instrument.
I'm curious. So, could you tell us a little bit about? So, you're going to be here for two performances.
Mhm.
What is it that you'll be playing for us here in Seattle?
I'll be playing two pieces which I love, both 20th century works, the Janacek Sonata and Shostakovich Piano Trio Number 2, both of which are really just like epic works, and I think contend with with isolation, with conflict, and with communication in a way that will feel extremely relevant. For example, Janacek, who's was born in Moravia, which is now the Czech Republic, his music was really animated by his fascination with both folk tunes and the patterns of human speech. So a lot of times in his work, he would go and record and listen to native dialects, and then try to sort of imitate those inflections in his work. So a lot of times the gestures that are happening in this sonata and the conversation between the piano and violin really do sound almost verbal. The sort of gestures that they're making really are sort of an exercise in this type of communication that has verbal precision, but without the gatekeeping or the confines of just using words.
We can't wait. I
I'm
know.
so excited.
I know the Shostakovich too. It's a very dark piece. I mean, it's beautiful and it's powerful, but it's also seemingly emotionally draining in a way.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Shostakovich's use of, I mean, the whole thing feels very solitary from the way it begins, just a cello playing harmonics, which is, sort of lets you know you're in for something eerie from the start. And the way it expands, the way it crescendos into like a pretty big last movement, his use of irony, his use of humor, which is it never sort of loses its tinge of darkness. I think it'll be I'm really looking forward to leaning into that with Ed and Andy.
what has this time sort of meant for you as you look ahead and think about, when things get back to some sense of normal, thinking ahead in a way, what does the future look like, do you think?
Right. It reaffirms something I had already been trying to do, which is really sort of trying to match message and medium. I think, music, since music is considered the universal language, and it has this sort of innate generosity, I think that's an opportunity, but I think it's also sometimes used as an excuse. The fact that music doesn't have to explicitly tackle any like social or current issues is sometimes can be utilized as a way to sort of squirm out of it. Whereas I think that classical music has this opportunity to it's sort of the fact that it is so universal allows it to be amorphous, allows it to be explicit but also so generous and universal and mean something different to everybody else. So I really want to craft programs that are aware of their relevancy, that have historical context, that demonstrate, if they're older, how they reverberate through the ages, or if they're new music, what they actually have to comment on about, difficult things right now, what they can actually offer in terms of recognition and listening. Programs like that, I think I'm a little more into defying certain traditions that are only upheld because they're traditions. And I think I have I have a traditional approach to how to care for, nurture, cultivate, approach the music itself. But when it comes to presentation, I'm into sort of being more of an iconoclast, whether that just be whether it is what you wear on stage, the way talking to an audience before playing a concerto, something like that. Just playing with different modes of presentation and communication in a way that certainly doesn't detract, but just reflects what we require now. I think that should be malleable.
And that kind of leads me to the question about a performance that you did a few years ago, but you recorded recently, the Lachen Verlernt,
Mm.
Laughing Unlearned, from the Foreign Bodies with the New York Phil. Can you talk about sort of that multi-dimensional presentation? I mean, it sounded like it was a lot of art forms that came
Mhm.
together. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that experience and all of these different mediums coming together?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a piece that I decided to learn basically just because I'm a really big fan of Salomond's music, and he wrote this piece for solo violin called Lachen Verlernt, which means laughing unlearned, which I loved just as a musical piece, and I really connected to conceptually. So this piece by Salomon, the idea behind it is basically the line comes from a poem, a line of Schoenberg's. Père Lunaire, in which the narrator is basically imploring the sad clown Pierrot to help her reclaim her laughter, which she feels that she's lost. And for Salonen, the performer in this, the violinist basically in this thing, serves as a metaphor for Pierrot, who sort of can act as this conduit for soulful reconnection or excavation. I loved the idea just that an art form can help us reconnect with or reclaim parts of ourselves that were always present, but had just been sort of stagnant or overlooked for a while. And I just loved that connection. We brought it to life in this series that you mentioned called Foreign Bodies, which involved visual animation. It was a performance with the New York Phil. There were dancers, and I got to play the solo. So during mine, I was actually stationed up in a box in David Geffen Hall and played from sort of the side of the stage while there were two dancers on stage.
Oh,
So,
wow.
I mean, of course, I wanted to watch them. That wasn't really an option at the moment. But I really like performances like that are interdisciplinary. They always teach me something new about the pieces that I'm doing. You know, seeing them represented visually always just informs, it sort of takes it into a new dimension, I guess, that I wasn't previously thinking about. I just love those little synesthetic connections. And that piece I got to record, then the recording on YouTube is a year after that, when I was able to return to it with that in mind, and just, you know, all sorts of new accumulations that you pick up along the way. But it's still,
Definitely.
I really love and look forward to performing more in the future.
That's great. I'm curious too, with so working with dancers, you know, so often there's such a strict time signatures and, you know, for the movement portion of it. So did that change or confine the way it had to be performed on your end, or were
No,
they
actually,
adjustable as well?
I was very prepared to have to, you know, go to whatever fit the dancers, but I got there and both the dancers and Salon were both like, do your thing, you know, start playing, we're good, we'll follow. So it was
Excellent.
reward, and I had to do nothing. I wasn't even there. I was like, I need to check in at certain times, but I was, no, it was just, you know, give the best performance you can, and the sound, their movement they'll work it out.
You do a lot of solo work, you do a lot of recital work, but you also do some chamber music. So why is chamber music such an important part of the music making that you do?
I think all of music making, what it means symbolically, what its use socially, societally, as a citizen, is about teaching us how to listen, teaching us how to sort of render our attention in a way that is generous, generative, and lateral. And that is the structure of chamber music. That sort of equal, equal but different, but allowing for autonomy sometimes, but always working as a unit, and being aware of this collective energy. That is what makes chamber music work. The best type of chamber music is when you allow each person to act sort of individually, to interpret in their own way, to add their own flavoring, but you're always conscious of sort of the greater good of the ensemble. And I love being in that, just in that mode of being, in that energy. That's something that I think I try to harness even when I'm playing solo, whether it's, you know, harnessing sort of the collective attention of an audience or with an orchestra behind, whatever. But with chamber music, it is the point of everyone. You are all sort of working to try and harness this inner sympathy. So it's the most prevalent in just in that configuration. So I adore it. The creating something with other people in such a present, such a communicative way is really, really phenomenal. And something I loved about the last time I was at Seattle Chamber Music Study was just like the rehearsals were amazing, honestly. I mean, performing with everyone is fantastic, but the actual process itself, the things we talked about, and the things that we just got to sort of, you know, learn, become fluent in one another just in a few short days, was just unbelievably fulfilling.
You've been in quarantine. It sounds like you took a little bit of a break from playing. What else have you been up to? Are you, you know, cooking things? Are you binge watching something? Are there books that you know, always set on the shelf that you're happy to get to dive into? Or,
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, I read a lot, which is sort of, honestly, I do that. I read a lot all the time, and actually, I thought that I was going to read just way more in quarantine, but for the first couple weeks, I actually read less than usual because I decided to redo my entire apartment. So that was the beautiful part. I like painted the ceiling. I decided to make one of
oh
my
wow,
windows hot pink. You know,
nice.
I put up some shelves, like which I hand dyed. You know, just like stupid home improvement stuff I had never done before. Having a stocked fridge for the first time in my life. And then, yeah, and then I got back into schedule of reading, talking on the phone a lot. Falling into things. Honestly, it was just like a lot of space in the beginning. Just going. I live in an area of Los Angeles where I'm able to sort of walk out into something more naturey and, you know,
That's nice.
social distance and whatnot. So I went on a lot of walks. Redid my apartment. Read. Just was sort of lazed for a while in a way that I don't usually permit myself. At least I don't permit myself to do it guilt free. But I figured in the beginning, like actually sort of resetting my approach to the logic of productivity in general felt like the right move.
Thank you again for spending a few minutes. We can't wait to have you here in just a few weeks and enjoy your performances.
Of course, thank you so much for having me. I really, really, really can't wait.